Hi friends, welcome back to Saturn Made Me Do It. I'm Nina, your host, cosmic cheerleader, and fellow Saturn return survivor. And I'm so happy you're here. If you tuned into last week's episode, you'll remember we kicked things off by talking about what the Saturn return is and how it flips your world upside down in the best and sometimes scariest way possible. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the biggest, boldest, and most life-altering decisions I've ever made, leaving the corporate world. This was a moment that completely redefined my life, and honestly, it was terrifying and, in hindsight, exhilarating all at the same time. And frankly, I have gone back and forth on whether or not to really record this episode, because truth be told, it was a pretty painful period in my life. But I do know that the reason why I feel so comfortable making certain decisions in my own life is because I listen to other people's stories about what they've gone through, what they've experienced, and their vulnerability and how it's really helped me. So I will share my story with you all today. And if it helps at least one person, then I've already done my job and it was completely worth it. So without further ado, grab a coffee, a tea, or maybe just a comfy seat, and let's get into it. So I think it's best to begin the story actually a couple years ago at the end of 2021. I was still working in government, but I was completely burnt out. And the reason for that is in the line of work I was doing as a public servant, we did some incredible work. I can't lie. I'm still incredibly proud of the things we did in New York, and I will forever show much love and gratitude to the people of this great state and to my fellow former coworkers who I still talk to this day. Hey guys. We were doing incredible things, big things, but we were also working incredible hours, crazy timesheets. And what do I mean by that? So in the role I had, it was very commonplace where we were working like 100-hour work weeks, and certain times of the year, you could only go home to like shower and then come back. And there were plenty of nights where I slept under my desk and we were working weekends. And you got to know your coworkers very, very well because of those circumstances. But we were doing it all for the greater good and for what we thought was right and for the causes that we believed in, and it made it sweeter to champion them. And that's under normal circumstances. So add in a global health pandemic, add in the fact that I had a portfolio where I was working on local government and I was just working on a healthcare portfolio. And New York City, unfortunately, does become the epicenter so early in the pandemic that those normal circumstances where you're working 100-hour weeks were inflated. And I'm not saying that it wasn't for a very good reason. It was for a damn good reason. People were in dire need of help. And I should probably mention that my role essentially was just negotiating a lot of deals for the political conference and for New Yorkers, for these politicians, right? So we can all come to an agreement at the end of the day of what is going to best serve constituents and anyone with livelihoods here. New York is used as the blueprint for some policy at the federal level. So here I was. It was a global pandemic. My workload, life as we knew it, just went crazy. And there was a lot of working from home, right? But when you're in that role and everyone's livelihoods are shaken up and nobody knows what to do next, your public service employees are going into work and trying to figure that out, especially when a federal administration, we're not allocating funds to those in need. So it makes it that much harder. So after that initial push in that summer and like everyone trying to navigate these uncharted waters, things kind of died down. In late 2021, I decided, after giving my final all into the public sector, I was like, you know what? I could honestly use a change of pace, because what I've learned from that experience is that you can have amazing policy solutions, but at the end of the day, they really have teeth when funding is involved. So I kind of knew this from working in the public sector as a public servant. I knew that I wanted to spend my career helping people. It was something that brings me joy. It's something I never stopped doing. And frankly, I think the world needs more people like that with an attitude similar to mine. I also knew that I needed to understand money in a very intimate way. I only understood it through a public servant lens, right? There's only so many levers you could really pull from that perspective. Dealing with certain stakeholders that do impact policy, only kind of at a very surface level. And I needed to understand those stakeholders deeply. And I kind of told myself, like, okay, you want to help people, Nina, but you need to understand how money fundamentally works across the board. You need to see it work in real time in the real world. And that's when I knew I needed to move to a place like New York City, the financial capital of the world, to go do that, to go be great. I wanted to go there and truly see if Frank Sinatra was correct. If I can make it there, I can make it anywhere. So then it had me thinking of, if I was going to move to New York City, if I was going to work in the financial industry, what would I do? What really aligns with what I'm trying to do and my personality? And I have a very risk-tolerant personality. I believe in myself completely. And that's not in an, egotistic, cocky way. It's in a, I know my worth, I know what I can do, now let me show you how it's done. So then I realized, if I'm gonna go to the finance world, if I'm gonna work in this space, I only want to be in either private equity or venture capital. And frankly, I lean more towards venture capital given my personality. And for those of you listening and wondering to yourself, like, Nina, what are those two things? Don't worry, I got you. Here's the quick hit. Private equity is just capital or money invested in a company or another entity that is not publicly listed or traded on a exchange, right? So think of like the New York Stock Exchange with that lovely bell. And then venture capital is funding that's given to startups or very early companies and businesses that show potential for long-term growth. If you see where I'm going with this, you can see why I like venture capital, because it's really just betting on yourself and just putting in the work. Just very generally speaking, I am a firm believer that if you do those two things, you'll be all right. The kids were all right in the end. So I begin my journey of applying to these firms, trying to get into this niche, this section of what is referred to as high finance is extremely difficult. Most of the time, the internet, the industry will tell you that you have to go to a target school, you have to come out of a premier investment bank, or you have to come out of a top MBA program. As I've alluded to you all before, I don't care what the odds are. It could be 5%, and I will always say I will be in that 5%. I just have to put myself out there. I know what I want. I have access to the internet. The library is free. We all have a pocket computer, a nice smartphone, or most of us do, where you can just look up anything and you can teach yourself. The world is your oyster. So I applied to these firms. I've spent my career in government thus far. So who is this woman to even get into that space? How is she even like getting past door one of the screening round, right? For interviews. But then it happens. I start getting interviews. I'm like, oh, okay, let's earmark this. Okay, nice little confirmation. And then I keep going. I keep making it through the rounds. I'm like, all right, I'm rizzing them up. I'm showing my stuff. Your girl came prepared, period. And then I make it to the final round and I would get beat out by bankers. Now, other people would be upset, right? They would be like, oh my gosh, why did they not select me for this role? Like, what do I need to do? But I actually really leaned into that rejection because it was just confirmation for me, really, that you had this stuff, kid. You just needed an anchor to say, to give that world confidence that, yes, we can point to this thing and say, she absolutely knows what she's talking about. She's seen this deal flow in real time, and we are confident that we can give her something and she will pick it up like that. I'm still casting my interview net pretty wide, pretty far, and I end up having 3 offers, right? And it's not in PE, it's not in VC. One was in a well-known government office that college me would have jumped at and no questions asked. Then there was a prestigious lobbying firm, but it's still in government world, right? But I would have made a lot of money. But I was like, no, I know what I want to learn. I know how I want to improve myself. I don't want to rest on my laurels. I'm too early in my career for that. This is the time for me to try new things, to learn as much as I possibly can, and to follow my curiosities. So the third one I end up taking. It's in the finance world, but it's in a pretty niche part of the sector. It's where I would say you can have a more balanced lifestyle, which was perfect because if I'm able to go home at 5 p.m., I can go figure out how I'm going to break into high finance. And then also, I could study for exams that are going to give me that leg up, that are going to say she knows exactly what she's talking about. So I picked door number 3. So now we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the story. I remember starting at this job and I was extremely excited. I was enthusiastic and ready to learn. I kind of knew deep down that, of course, right? This wasn't going to be a long-term gig, but I was going to make the most out of this experience. And so with that, I already knew from, of course, the public sector to make connections right off the bat. Get your name out there, get to know people, and also understand the ecosystem to which I will be professionally living in for the next time being. I immediately am like introducing myself to people, asking them what they do, who they are, where they're from. And I always love asking people, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would tell at the time I was 26? So 26-year-old you that you wish you knew back then, but you know now. And I collected some very cool, interesting answers from my colleagues at the time, especially those who are significantly older than me, and that is a blessing, not a dig. And so I would just, schedule coffee chats, and then I would just kind of like dig into stuff. I'm like, let's figure out what I know. And I was working on something where it's actually pretty similar to the old world in some regards of my government work. So it wasn't like I was starting from zero. There was some level of foundational knowledge already set in stone. And add on the fact that this is not my first job. I've been working for years at this point, and I've certainly put in my 10,000 hours for the last gig to become really, really good at it and really understand at least myself and how I should professionally operate. I've made those early career mistakes when you're fresh out of school of like, oh, maybe don't do that. So now we're applying it into this second era. And I am seemingly received pretty well. Like, I think everyone's responding well to me. People are laughing. And I am like, all right, this is going to be great. I am going to get exactly what I need. I'm going to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? So I look and I see there are employee resource groups that I can be a part of that are very aligned with my personal values and the things I have championed for in the past. And then there's also a venture capital firm under our corporate umbrella. And it's a corporate VC. And what they did was they would allow their employees to be venture capital scouts. And that means that a venture capital scout is going to like find these deals and then sit and meet with these founders and see if the stars are aligned, that our interests will provide funding or an investment, right, into this company. And it just seemed perfect. I was like, great. There's support systems in place for me. There's really fancy gadgets that are available to me now that you don't have working in government. And now I am able to learn on the clock because they were able to sponsor your continued learning. So that's when I was like, I don't even have to bankroll studying and taking that Chartered Financial Analyst exam, that CFA exam, the first level. The company can pay for it. This is fantastic. And so when you start there, or at least when I started there, right, I had to go through like a very long onboarding, and that's also partially due to just regulatory requirements. What can you do? I eventually begin to notice that there's an official leader, and then there's always an unofficial leader. The one that rules over the emotions of the office, the essential, just the vibes of the office. We all are familiar with who is actually in charge on paper, but who is really the person in charge, that when they log onto a call, when they enter a room, when they join a work trip, you know that they're going to set a tone, whether they're in a fantastic mood or in a really sour mood. And if they're in a sour mood and you've effectively pissed this person off or offended them somehow, some way, it's curtains for you, girl. It's curtains. Over time, I realize who the unofficial leader is in our New York office. And I was like, good golly, oh my goodness, let me steer clear of this individual. Let me just mind the business that pays me and just continue to just do what I need to do so I can get to where I need to go. But the thing is, for the audience, I just so happen to be young, black, talented, kind, funny, and incredibly ambitious. And I had an old boss tell me years ago, prior to me starting this one, that when you're all those things, if you're a white guy, you're lapping people. Your career is skyrocketing. There is nothing in your way. But he also reminded me that I was indeed a black woman in all of those things, and that he prepared me to know that the world will resent me for it. So he knew he needed to make me tough. So back to me being in this place, finding this unofficial leader, and having all of those qualities, you best believe the girls were mad. Middle-aged woman, pressed. It was almost this air of like, why does she have all these things and I don't? And I implore anyone who thinks that way, because sometimes we're human, that if you see someone have something that you want, whether it's a tangible object, a personality trait, instead of moving with malicious intent, I implore you to say to yourself that if I can see it, I can achieve it. And if I can achieve it, nothing is standing in my way. Now, anyone who is an employee of color or woman of color in a corporate environment will understand what I'm saying, that with that information I just said, you best believe things do rack up. They do snowball. And that's where things eventually get to compound and start getting weird around here. Now, eventually I finished my onboarding, and then what happens is that you get sent off to your official manager. I remember meeting my manager, and I will never forget this. I will always remember this for like the rest of my career because it was just so shocking to my ears. I will never forget the first time I'm meeting my manager in this role, and we'll refer to her as Eris because I'm a mythology fan. And so Eris says to me in our very first conversation ever, as I'm telling her about the work I have done in public service and how my identity and how my authenticity is very important to me and the line of work I will do in this lifetime. And then this woman says to me verbatim, "Oh, Nina, my family thinks that colored people are bad, but I don't think colored people are bad." Now, why would you say that out loud with your chest? Why would you say that on the clock to me? Because in government, I've heard like literally everything across the spectrum. So I've heard crazy stuff. But the thing is, like, we are not advocating for certain causes. We are under a corporate private umbrella. You can't just say whatever, even if you do so happen to subscribe to those ideas. I didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to say it on the clock. And I was not expecting that at all, really, but especially the first time you're meeting your direct manager. So you can imagine that if that is the first thing that's being said, that we are in for a crazy roller coaster ride. It is safe to assume that other comments were made daily about other groups as if I thought it would be funny or something. And I would just have to nervously laugh it off because this is someone I'm reporting to, and I'm not going to sacrifice my financial circumstance because you're racist. Girl, my check, it will still clear. My bills will still be paid. Now I know that I need to learn how to navigate around you because your ideology is not going to stop me from my destiny, period. I'll still do what I need to do. And then the other thing in that role is that the same person who is making those types of comments, whether it's towards me or about other cultural groups, felt the need to hand me their emotional labor of their personal life. This is wildly inappropriate. This is something no one should ever do at the workplace, especially in a supervisory role. It should actually be swapped a little bit of like your subordinate should be giving you the emotional labor because you're supposed to be mentoring them and guiding them through their endeavors and through their time at the place of employment. So you're being racist. You're giving me emotional labor that's not mine. It's fully yours. You just don't want to do the work to unpack it. And because you're giving me the emotional labor, I have to listen to it for at least 4 hours a day sometimes. And then it would honestly be even more. And I'm trying to study for this difficult exam that only 30 people have passed. I'm trying to understand how the operations are at this company because I've never worked for such a strict regulatory company before where you have to adhere to those guidelines. I'm just sitting here like, what on earth is going on? I had these goals coming in, right? They were getting delayed. In comes Saturn, right? I'm just getting frustrated. I'm like, I set this goal. I thought I was going to hit it. It's delayed. What's happening? I always try to triage with myself of like, how can I adjust this? How can I Matrix Keanu Reeves this issue and then make it on the other side of it? And I was eventually starting to fall behind on my studying because I would have to like play like therapist on the clock. And you're probably wondering like, Nina, why didn't you say anything to HR? Why didn't you go to higher ups? I held it in for a while. And I held it in because when you're an employee of color, when you're a woman of color in a workplace, those systems do not operate for your benefit. HR works to protect the company, not the employee, regardless of race, genders, orientation, and creed. I want everyone to know that. I want everyone to remember that moving forward. So if I am going to report it, it means that I've reached a point where I'm ready to document it, but I need to come up with an exit plan. And like I said, you're not going to ruin my bag because you can't seem to get it together on realizing that it was 2023, not 1945. And so I keep it into myself, and I realize I have to dot my I's, I have to cross my T's, I have to make it really, really difficult for them to get rid of me. So I still am being very kind, extremely professional. I make sure I don't hit any regulatory faux pas. I make sure that things are as clean as they can be, while still allowing myself the grace to make mistakes, because you do learn from like little unintentional faux pas, right? We're all human, even in professional environments. And I almost forgot to add the note of why I didn't really go to HR is because I also knew eventually that my direct manager was also our managing director's favorite. Yeah. So you best believe I was like, let me put up with this for as long as I can, and literally just eyes on the prize, eyes on the prize. And thankfully, I had a teammate where she was fantastic, and we just kind of bonded together and like supported each other and found solutions when things were really crazy. But it was just so much all the time. And I like, your problems are yours. I have my stuff, you need to deal with yours. And eventually this just erodes my mental health to a point where I just can't seem to take it, because you're just dealing with someone who's so like just a disaster. And I'm trying to be kind about this while saying the truth. Just complete utter disaster. And now I have to do the legwork for both of us so we can get our work done. I have to play cheerleader. I have to be Jesus H. Christ, essentially, on the clock to make sure that these miracles that we have to pull for our department get done. But alas, it does compound, and it does get really, just really terrible. I find out that this same individual is also like saying whatever about me behind my back. I'm literally sitting on a Teams call with you, listening to you cry, listening to the woes that are your life. And then you have the nerve, the audacity to go talk smack, thinking I'm not gonna hear it. Baby. Ooh. I'm not the one. But I just knew with that little overarching, like, oh, your MD loves her, that if I ding her out of a good mood, it's curtains for me. What am I gonna do? It's like she brought me down to her level. Down did I go eventually, because I was just in such despair. I would dread having to open my laptop because I just didn't want to deal with that stuff. I would dread having to go into work because I would open my laptop, sit in an open concept office in a cubicle, and then have to sit and listen to that on the phone in my headset and pretend like everything is hunky-dory as people are walking by me, and you have someone sobbing or yelling or whatever in your ears about their personal affairs. The personal affairs were very extreme, I will say. Like, I have never in my life heard someone go through so many things at one time. And I will also say that for the audience, you should be very careful of who you feel bad for. Just saying. because yes, you should offer kindness and grace. However, if multiple extreme things are happening to someone, like I'm talking extreme events, back to back to back, proceed with caution. I will say it, there's probably some divine reason or something they did where they need to learn something. They need to grow in a alternative way. So I would just sometimes like cry on the way to work, like on the subway. I used to joke with my coworkers actually, like, oh, I only had my corporate cry 3 times this week because I would just detest it. I would resent it. And I did confide in some mentors at that place where I was like, listen, this is what's happening. How do I navigate this? How do I go around this? How do I support this person? How do I do this? How do I juggle everything, hold the spinning plate? How do I build this airplane and try and fly it at the same time? Because I have never seen this type of unprofessionalism before. And that, again, is me saying that after I have literally heard some crazy stuff on record in my political career. At least in that career, you're expecting it. Here, I don't expect people to say crazy stuff when you're not even on a revenue generating team. So I put up with that for a couple years and I just feel myself declining, and I get to a point where I do end up speaking to HR just to start documenting. I have accepted, like, I don't care what the outcome of this is. I just need this to be documented in case somebody unfortunately has this experience with this individual. I didn't pursue legal action for a plethora of reasons, and it's because I just don't see what's to be gained from it. I mean, it's a very expensive process. It is very emotionally intensive for me and others. It would be like office politics on 1,000 when it goes through the motions. All of that, it's a long process. And you go through all of that, and it's kind of, in my opinion, it's from the academic books I read, because I did look into this as like, is this even an option for me? Am I even ready for this? It doesn't really seem like you gain much out of it as a Black employee. And so I just thought to myself, like, I'm going to document this because I just need it literally on record for this company. Because if it's on record, maybe you will knee jerk and figure out to not be stupid or dumb. I take it to HR. I've never seen an HR person ever break character from their very neutral response and tone as much as I did when I was speaking to that HR employee. That's how you knew it was just very out there and extremely severe. And after I go to HR, as you can imagine, once you pull that trigger, you can't walk it back. It just ups the ante. People get crazy because I'm talking about the head of the department's favorite protege. So there's almost like a gun to my head. And things do get worse. And I just really, if I was dreading going to work then and I was crying on the subway on the way to work, you best believe I was crying every day, 5 days a week before I started that job. And no one really knew because I tried to maintain my professionalism. I would have like concealer. I knew I had like little eye drops so no one could tell. My energy and my aura were the dead giveaways to my friends at that job, because they did eventually say, are you okay? You're not like your typical bubbly, cheery self. And they would start calling me after work to try and check on me. Be like, are you all right? Do you want to talk about this? Because they were observing from afar what was going on. And I get into the summer and I can't even think of like what I want to do next because I'm just so exhausted. I'm just so tired of it all. In August, I just remember this moment. I realized like the mind-body connection of everything just was severed. And that's when I knew it was time to leave. It was time, because if I didn't leave, I'm not exaggerating. I would have been 6 feet under. That's how poor my mental state was. So I decided I was going to leave without another job lined up. And I knew, while that is scary in its own right, I would rather wake up tomorrow than endure that nonsense for so little of a check in the grand scheme of things. And I remember putting in my notice, and then I was able to speak to the HR employee, and she actually was like, yeah, you can just get paid out for the next 2 weeks. You don't have to work the 2 weeks. And I was like, fantastic, because I don't want to come back here. And I remember going home and just like laying in bed forever. It was just like just sleeping. I was just so tired. And it took me longer than I thought. Like, I thought I was going to be like bouncing back within 48 hours for whatever reason. And I just spent a couple days just in my room, just laying in bed, just like a shell of myself. I'm also wondering, like, this had to be the right choice, but I need like a sign, a direction, or something from a higher power, the universe, a greater being, whoever, somebody, of what to do next. And so about almost a week from when I resigned, I get an email from this golf group where I'm a part of. It was just this women's golf group. I wanted to be in community. And I also, we love an excuse to walk outside. And I get this email at 11:30, about a week later. And it says, sign up, we're going to the NASDAQ. And for context, while I was in that role at that job, I would tell my coworkers all the time that I was going to ring the bell one day. All the time. And they would always be like, Nina, what are you talking about? Or yeah, whatever. Sure, right. So I'm looking at this email and we're going to the NASDAQ a week after I had just left my job with nothing lined up. And so, of course, I RSVP. Are you kidding? I was like, hey, I need something to do. I need to leave this house because this depression is not snatching me up. And 2 days later, I go to the NASDAQ and I'm surrounded by these fabulous ladies. And I just remember this experience. I was like, it's like my body was taking a screen recording of me walking into the building, saying hello to the staff that worked there. And eventually we go down to the studio for the bell ringing ceremony. And the founder and her family and the executive team, they get to take pictures with their families and like have a moment on that stage. And the producer says, because there's like about 40 women at this event, she says, okay, only 3 other people get to have their pictures taken because the pictures that get taken are shown and it's displayed in Times Square. So I just had a moment with myself and with God, like, God, if I get my picture taken, then that is confirmation for me that everything I have ever dreamed for myself, everything I have ever wanted to be, does in fact come true. So I get online. One girl goes, there are 3 women ahead of me on this line. And the first girl goes, she gets her picture taken. The second girl goes, she gets her picture taken. And then I just had a moment right before this third woman goes up to get her picture taken of just detachment. I just let it go. I was like, okay, this is probably not for me. Like my dreams, they don't happen that way. I'm meant to do something else, and that is perfectly fine. I just need to know what that other thing is. But I just moved into this like stage of acceptance because the third woman does go up and get her picture taken. And I just was in complete radical acceptance of what the answer was from the universe. And then I see the producer and she's sitting there kind of thinking. She's got like a quizzical look on her face. And then she goes, actually, you know what? Points to me. You'll be the cutoff. Oh. I walked up on that stage and I was beaming. Oh my God. I was cheesing so hard. You can actually like see it on my LinkedIn and my personal Instagram of just how hard I was cheesing in that picture, because it just validated, it confirmed that I, in fact, am the person and I am the woman that I think I am. I am everything amazing. I have my childhood dreams manifested. This is incredible. And I do see my face in Times Square, and I take a picture and I send it to like everybody. I send it to my, at that point, former coworkers who I was still close with. I send it to my friends who have been listening to this soap opera of events at that job. I send it to my family, where my mom posts it all over Facebook and she's like bragging about it, and my dad's telling everybody. Like, it was just a beautiful nod from the powers that be. It was a beautiful moment of a time where I just felt so low that things are about to get crazy good. Leaving that job was just the beginning. It opened the door to so many incredible opportunities to come, like this podcast. But more importantly, it taught me to trust myself, to embrace the unknown, and to keep following things that light me up. It's okay to want more. Fear is part of the process. You don't need a perfect plan, but betting on yourself is always worth it. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about what happens after the leap. How do you start building something from scratch? How do you handle the inevitable challenges and doubts? Trust me, it's a journey worth taking. All right, friends, that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you for hanging out with me and letting me share my story. If you're thinking about making a big change in your life, just know you've got this. The universe has your back, and so do I. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need a little cosmic push. And don't forget to connect with me on social media. I'd love to hear your stories of transformation. Until next time, keep shining, keep growing, and remember, Saturn made you do it.